And welcome back to another amazing episode, even though I am slightly croaky, of the Big Gay Overalls podcast. Thank you once again for joining in, and I apologize for my throat, and I may have a random coughing fit today. I'm a week into some sort of a chesty cold. Finally, I think I'm coming out the other side of it, but it's still been not much fun, and I still don't sound great. So I apologize for that in advance. But we're just gonna see what happens. I really needed to get an episode out this week. I hadn't done one, so I thought I've just got to suck it up and just do it. Here are the perils where you don't batch record, and I have 8 episodes sitting in the bank ready to go. Um, so this is still happens every week. And will I learn a lesson? I think not. I like, just keep going with the flow with whatever feels authentically right for me each week to talk about. So, for those who are new to listening, thank you for listening. For those who have been long-term subscribers, thank you for listening. I appreciate you. This is my little podcast where I talk all things about the twists and turns and transformations that come with living your authentic life, coming out late in life, um, and just navigating life stuff in general. And today I thought we'd talk about something that's been really sort of ticking over my head. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about it is, rewriting the personal narratives and the stories we tell ourselves in our head. Um, and if you've been following along, um, you know that for most of my life, uh, I lived according to a script that wasn't mine. I didn't write it, I didn't seek it out. It was one I thought that I had to follow. But here's the thing, we all have the power to rewrite the story, the narratives, the stories we tell ourselves, the things we believe. And when we do, we get this amazing freedom. But it takes work, and it's hard to get there. Like, it's not just I'm just going to rewrite this. We need to do work and unpack layers of stuff. So I thought I'd talk through some of that stuff today because it can be challenging, particularly when you take time to reflect and then you realize that why is it I actually think this way or believe this, and where did it come from? So, which is probably a good segue into where I want to talk is like about the stories we inherit that are gifted to us. Like from the moment we're born, we are handed a script by someone else. Um, you know, Parents, family to start with, then teachers, friends, people who influence us. It, you know, from culture, our communities, these, people like us do things like this. This is how we're all raised. It tells us who we should be, how we should be, what we should want, and how we should live, and what the definition is of a good, successful life, and also a good person. So for me, that script was, go to school, be good, grow up, get married to a man, of course, um, have kids, have the picket fence, and live a nice, quiet, within your boundaries, don't overreach, heteronormative life. That was it. And for a long time, I followed the script, even though it didn't feel right, because it's like, but this is what I'm supposed to do. And this is not what I didn't feel like this is what life should feel like, but just did it because this is the script. And, we all have different scripts. Maybe your script is different. Maybe you're told that being gay or queer, wasn't an option. Or that to be successful, you couldn't be happy. You couldn't have it all. And I'm sure we've all been told that one. We can't have it all. Or there were parts of you that you had to hide so that you could be loved because those parts were unlovable. And these stories about who we are, what we believe, I'm this sort of person, I'm that sort of person, they're so ingrained we don't even realize we're living by them. It's just what we do. It's automatic pilot. But here's an interesting truth is that these stories are not the whole picture. And they aren't the only ones we can live by. And again, to get back to the start, we can change them if we have awareness and take the time to sit with them and understand it. And one of the things I like to say a lot is that awareness precedes change. And once we're aware of something and we're aware that it's uncomfortable or it doesn't fit or it doesn't make us happy or we don't like it, then we're either compelled to do something about that or we're compelled to not. And that's a choice then we make. Like, do I want to make this change? Does this make me uncomfortable enough to want to change? Or am I okay with where things are at? And that's okay too. You don't have to change. But for me, I realized that my script wasn't me when I was in my, mid 40s. I was running a business, I was married, I was doing all the things I was supposed to do. And on the outside, everything looked great. Lisa's thriving, she's crushing it, she's being successful. She's working hard, she's hustling, she's grinding. Um, but on the inside, like I was just falling apart piece by piece because I was suffocating myself. I felt trapped. I was trapped by the expectations, by fear, by the narrative that told me I had to be someone I wasn't. And I didn't even know who the other person was that I could be, if that makes sense. Um, and I was constantly trying to be good enough, to be enough, to work hard enough, to be successful enough, to fit in what other people's definitions were. And that's a flogging to nowhere because it was never going to be enough. I was never going to be successful enough by person A's definition, even if I was by person B's definition. There was no way to achieve what everybody else thought. And I didn't have my own definition of what that. And maybe you felt like that too, that it just didn't fit. And maybe you're feeling it now and you're in the midst of starting this sort of adventure and journey. And, if you are just starting out and you're feeling that right now, like recognizing that your story needs to change, but also can change is the first step to rewriting it. We're not locked into this thing that someone else created. We can make change. That is fucking scary and it's hard and can seem overwhelming and we can overthink the shit out of that. But, you know, it takes courage to say, hey, this isn't working. This isn't me. And the flip side of that is once you do that, you open the door to potential for a whole new story and one that's yours to create from the get-go. And you can create your identity. You can create your hopes, your goals, your dreams. You can create your own definition of success, which is huge for most of us that haven't ever, even truly understood that. And that's a big thing, is being able to sit and go, well, what does a successful life look like to me? And it's kind of like being a kid in a candy store. The doors are open, like, have what you want. You're like, well, I can have anything. And it's almost becomes overwhelming. So that's where you need to sit with it and figure out. And I know I've talked on other podcasts here or other episodes about we need to define our values, like what means something to us. Who am I? What sort of person am I? And then from there, you can go, well, what does it look like if I'm leading a successful life? What work do I want to do? You don't have to do the 9 to 5. You don't have to have the 2.3 kids and the picket fence. Your definition of family might be you, your partner, and your dog. That's great. That's my family. It might be a close group of friends. All of those things are up to you to define rather than by somebody else's arbitrary definition. And it makes it really, really tricky to, I guess, navigate that a bit when you don't know and you aren't sure. So you've got to do that self-work first and then let yourself loose and go, okay, what can I be? And the truth is you can be anything you want. You can set your sights on anything. So, like, how do we go about, and people will say, yeah, Lisa, that's all well and good. But how do I rewrite these stories that I've had for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years? How do I go about changing that? Because it seems like a lot to unpack and undo and untangle myself from and create. So for me, my process is asking myself some questions and sitting with it for the answers is the first thing I found really powerful. And I heard this concept on a podcast recently, um, with whose voice am I listening to? Is it my own or is it the voice from somebody else? Like, could that be, is it societal? Is it my family? Is it fear? And it's really interesting when you sit with it and you hear that little voice that tells you you're not good enough or you can't do something or you should. And we just take it for granted that that's our inner voice, but it's actually not. And when we can sit and listen, and go, whose voice is this? Where is it coming from? And you sit with it, and then you can start to see, that's my mother's voice. That's, my friend's voice. It's um, society's voice or whatever. And you'll find that that voice is usually really loud and noisy and boisterous because that's the one that's driving the story. And it's invested as like, it's a protection mechanism. It's like, no, this story needs to continue. If we actually sit and listen to, for my voice, it's much quieter. But once we learn to um, tap into that and hear what that sounds like, then we go, oh, that's what's going to guide my navigation. That's what's going to take me forward. The second thing that's important to sit with is, what do I truly want? Like, even taking it as far as if money, time, opportunities, there are no obstacles. What do I truly want? And it's not about what you think you should want or what is appropriate or sensible, but what feels true to you. And the other, big question that I asked and worked through myself is, what would it look to live authentically? And I had to figure out the two questions, like, whose voice am I listening to? What do I truly want? And then the third layer is my values. Who am I? To understand what I would need to do to live authentically. How does that fit? And so for me, rewriting my stories meant that embracing parts of myself that I had kept hidden for so long, even from myself. It meant coming out to myself. It meant coming out as gay and then allowing myself and giving myself permission to find joy in a life that felt like mine for the first time, and accepting that I deserve this life and I deserve to feel that joy and that happiness. And your story might look completely different, and it will be, because your story is your life, your lived experiences. And it doesn't always have to be about, and I know, like, this podcast is about me coming out late in life, and I talk about a lot of those themes. But when we talk about authenticity and coming out, it doesn't have to be around your sexuality, your gender identification, any of that sort of stuff. It could be stepping away from a career that doesn't fulfill you, to do meaningful work that does fulfill you. Maybe it's about finding a voice after years and years and years of silence, that you've put up with a situation that was not for you, whether it be a toxic relationship or a friendship. Um, and maybe it's also about finding joy in a part of yourself that you thought you'd lost, doing things that fill your cup and bring you joy, which is huge. So, this applies to every human being. It's not just for those struggling with identity or in the LGBTQI space or anything like that. We all have aspects of ourselves that we could change or rewrite if they don't suit who we authentically are. And whatever it is in your life, whatever it applies to, just know this, that you have the power to write your own story. And it's not easy, it's not quick, but it's worth it. And, this is where I talk about the power of having, someone who can sit external to you, whether that be a therapist, a counselor, a coach, to be able to ask you questions that might guide your thinking around, why is that important to me? Why do I believe that? Where did that come from? Rather than just going, Well, this is just the way that I am. Yes, that's the way you are right now, but why do you think you are that way? Why does it matter to you? Why do you want to hold on to that? Or why do you think that can't be changed? And when someone will create an environment that you can that will ask you that question and then just sit and wait for the answer, and then you can trip over your own truth. Like clients I work with, I don't have the answers. I don't give them the answers because that's not my role. I'm not an expert in your life. Shit, not even really an expert in my life. Spoiler alert. But I believe in your capacity to know your own answers. Where we get stuck as humans is we need some help to uncover that and to dig through that. And that's where we get a little bit stuck. So having someone who can ask you those questions who aren't emotionally attached to your story can be quite powerful. And there's a lot of value in that. Like I've always been a huge advocate of, you know, I had therapy, talked to a counselor, I have a coach, all of those sort of elements fit together in the pieces of the puzzle, which help me, you know, create my own path forward. And no one in that group of people is saying you should or do this or do that. It's just simply a question. And whatever my answer is, then that's fine. And I'm, because it's my answer, it's my story to rewrite. So if someone is coming to you and said, I can help you, I can give you the pathway, I give you the roadmap to a successful life, run as far as you can in the opposite direction. Because no one is an expert in your life and no one is an expert in your story except for you. You are the only one that truly knows what you want. So the beautiful thing when we get to this point of owning our story, firstly, and identifying where it came from, then being able to discard or rewrite the parts that no longer serve us, it doesn't just change our life, it inspires others to do the same. And when you step into and embrace and claim and even identify your own truth, who you are, then other people around you, you give them permission to do the same, which is a powerful gift that you give not only yourself, but others. And that's something I've realized from, having this weekly conversation with people I don't even know. And then I get comments and people send me messages about, how some element of the story has impacted them and they felt braver or stronger or they made one small change, which is mind blowing to me that I can sit here and do this little recording in my little bubble and somebody on the other side of the world reflected and made some change because they saw that it could be done, which is why I started this process of sharing my truth and sharing my story because, there are people out there who are where I was and, you know, didn't have when I was in that point, I didn't have lights to guide me forward. I didn't even know there were other people who'd walked the same path. So I started creating, telling my story and creating this podcast so that people can see that there is a way forward, that it can be done successfully. Because I find that if all you're surrounded with is the struggle and the suffering, then that's where you want to get stuck. You kind of get stuck in that space. But understanding that there's so much power and um, potential and joy and freedom on the other side of it. And even as you start taking the tiniest steps, you can experience that, which is, just mind blowingly huge. And if we can get out of that struggle where I'm going to be alone, everyone's going to hate me, the world's going to end, we can really build an identity around that. And that doesn't bring us joy. It doesn't bring us hope. It doesn't make us feel like we can do anything. So if you start to identify and see that joy is possible, happiness is possible, and that you also deserve it, like that's a big one, is you deserve it. Suddenly it becomes a lot easier. And you almost give yourself permission to feel that joy. And think about the people that have inspired you on your own journey in anything. Chances are they certainly didn't stick to a script they were given. Um, they've just cut their own path through the forest. Didn't matter how messy or hard or uncharted it was. They wrote their own stories and they showed you what was possible. And maybe through that, that set you on your course. And when we read biographies and autobiographies of famous people, how many of them had a story that did not start great, and they had terrible, terrible childhoods and no opportunities. And every single one of those stories, they talk about how they were determined it was going to be different for them. They did not want to accept the same things. Now, nothing makes them any more special than you. They just made a decision to do something differently. And it's quite powerful when you listen to those or read about those, and you're like, oh, what can I do? But quite often we don't have the awareness that we could actually do the same thing in our own lives. Like, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a megastar touring for millions of people, but it does mean that you have the potential to create whatever life that you want. And that's the power of living authentically. It's not just about you. It's about creating a whole ripple effect that touches everyone around you and even people you don't know. Because if someone close to you then is inspired and makes change, then their circle will go out from there and their circle will go at the front. And it's just exponential, the reach that you can have for teaching people it's okay to be themselves. And I found on my little wander through life that it's easier for me to live authentically when I don't make it about me. So when I am trying to, or I'm struggling through changing my story or my beliefs, it's like, I'm not doing it for me. How can I do this that it's going to help somebody else? And when I take me out of it and make me very small and insignificant, because the sun does not revolve around me, but how do I live my best life, even if it helps one other person? Um, and it becomes a lot easier then when it's not about ourselves and we can make it about what does somebody else need. So before my throat gives way, and I die, I'm going to wrap this one up. So, the questions I would leave you with today, and these are questions that I ask myself, as a check-in, and Sharon and I do it with each other quite a lot, is that, what's the story you are living right now? What are you telling yourself? Like, what are you limiting yourself with? And what is the story you want to tell? What do you want it to look like? We quite often have conversations at home here, like, what do we want our life to look like? What do we want this to look like? What do we want this to be? And they're really powerful conversations because you give yourself permission to express what it is that you really want. And if you're feeling stuck, like, it's never too late to turn the page, and you can turn it a teeny tiny bit. And I know I've talked before about, taking the smallest action can give you the greatest sense of control. 100 and gazillion %. Like, the smallest action that you can take. You don't need to rewrite the whole book. Just turn the page, write a new chapter, write a new paragraph, write a new sentence to create something that feels like you, and to sit with and understand what it is that you want, what makes you tick. So thank you once again for joining me on this episode of my little podcast. I appreciate it. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it. Shoot me a DM on Threads, Instagram, and TikTok as Big Gay Overalls Podcast. Share a thought in the comments if you're on Spotify, or, write your own narrative or how you're changing your story, and tag me on the socials. More than happy. You can shoot me an email at lisa@biggayoverallspodcast.com. This coming Saturday, I am hosting a free webinar, Authenticity 101. Link is in the show notes if you'd like to jump on and register for that. If you do register and you can't make it because it's at 10 a.m. Queensland time in Australia, there will be a video afterwards as well. And also this week, this was exciting. I published an ebook on Amazon and it's going to be a bestseller. And it's about dying inside. It's called The Cost of Living Inauthentically. So you can search for that under Lisa Kirkman, Dying Inside, and I'd love it if it's 99 cents if you're in the US, $1.50 in Australia. I would love your support for that as well. But more importantly, please give us a like or subscribe. And the most important thing is if you know someone who is struggling with their story, share the episode with them. Let's remind each other, and this is our power, is that we can remind each other that we have the power to create something beautiful, authentic, and uniquely ours. But this is where we need, a tribe to remind us that, of our own worth and our own value. So keep being you. Keep being awesome. Thank you for following. Wear your authenticity like a badge of honor and own who you are because you're enough and you're worth it. All right, guys, I'll see you next week. Hopefully a little less croaky and a little less coffee. And reach out if you want to chat. I'm happy to connect. All right, guys, see you on the next one.